Thank you, Beth. I'm glad So kind. I always get a little nervous when people start applauding before we've given the presentation, but that's okay. I'm fine. I will take it. This program needs just a slight introduction in the sense there's been a change in the program in the sense that this was supposed to be a trio and is now solo. So when I talked with Beth about this several months ago, Keith Howard and Sharon Ferraro were going to be also a part of this. They could not be here this evening, so I'm sort of filling in for them for certain aspects of, you'll see. But anyway, as Beth says, my name is Lynn Holt. As you can see here, I'm the Regional History Curator at the Western Michigan University Archives and Regional History Collections. I know that many of you have been to our facility off Oakland Drive, the Zhang Legacy Collection Center. If you have not, I really truly invite you to come and see it. We've been there since October of 2013. I won't go into too much detail about the archives if you're not familiar with us, because on the table as you came in, there's two items, and I'll explain the second one as we proceed this evening through the program. But one of the items that I brought with you is what we call our bookmarks. They're pretty big bookmarks, I have to tell you that. They're pretty big and pretty long, but they serve very well for that. And one of them gives you a little general information about the archives, tells you about our facility, our hours, and our contact information if you're interested. So if you haven't been to the archives, if you're interested in the kinds of things that we have, please feel free to pick one of those up. I'd also like to start off by just giving a lot of great thanks. It's the whole thing where it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes several institutions to help me with a program like this. I want to thank Beth and her staff who scanned a number of photographs from one of the photographers we're going to be talking about this evening. And also at our facility, we employ a lot of students. We have between 12 to 15 students per semester that work for us, and we have a student that does scanning, and boy, did she do a great job scanning a lot of the images that we're going to be looking at this evening. So the photos that you're going to see this evening come from both the library's collections and also the archives collections, but obviously that's not the only place that has photographs like this. Well, have you ever had a situation where someone asks you, what is your favorite restaurant? What is your favorite book? And it's so hard to do that. Sometimes I get, like, what is your favorite building? What is your favorite house? Thank goodness no one has ever asked me who is your favorite daughter, because I love them both, because you want to do that kind of thing. But when it comes to talking about what is one of my favorite artifacts, I have to say photographs. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't like diaries. I love letters. I love all the kinds of things we have and that I've been using for well over 30 years to do research. But the thing about photographs that I really love is what it tells you in a very, very small way. So for example, for those people that know me, know I absolutely love this photo. This photo was taken around 1914, and the first time I saw it, it appeared in a commemorative booklet for the opening of the police station, and the police station at that time was opened on Water Street. And so this was just a random shot that was taken, but you can tell in this, it tells you so much. We're at Burdick Street. We're looking north from about South Street. And you can look at transportation. You can look at architecture. You can look at signage. You can look at this figure right here, which I've called the woman in white. There's stories that you can develop as far as, who was she? Where was she going? I always like to say maybe she was going to the Star Bargain House before she hiked down South Street to the Majestic Theater. I mean, it just draws you in, and you learn so much about the community by looking at a photograph like this. Photographs tell us things like this. There's so many aspects of the history of this community that photographs can tell you. So what we're going to do this evening, though, we're going to be looking at photographs, but we're going to be looking at specifically the photographers behind the photographs. We're going to be looking at 5 different photographers this evening. Now, are those the only photographers in Kalamazoo? Oh, no. It's just a small flavor of the both men and women that were behind the cameras who took pictures. And I think that when you're looking at these individuals, keep in mind that I don't think that they ever thought when they were taking these photographs that somehow these photographs were going to live on 50, 60, 100 years later, and that we were going to use them to document the life in Kalamazoo. I don't think they obviously thought about that, but that's the way that it's been. So let's begin. The first photographer I'd like to share with you is Schuyler Colfax Baldwin. Now, Mr. Baldwin, now this is an image. The original is at the Kalamazoo Valley Museum. This appears in a booklet called Sun Pictures in Kalamazoo. And if you're really lucky, you might find a copy of it down in the Friends bookstore. It's a booklet that the Kalamazoo Museum produced about daguerreotype photography in Kalamazoo. Mr. Baldwin was born in New York, Troy, New York, in 1822, and he came to Kalamazoo in December of 1851. I always wanted to know, why did he come here? Why Kalamazoo? You know, was it the climate? Was it its proximity to the lake? You know, whatever. Anyway. And I actually found out what I assumed to know why he came, and it had to do with his relatives. Currently in Kalamazoo in 1851, his sister was living here with her husband, Dr. Samuel Graves, who was teaching at Kalamazoo College. He was a Baptist minister, and at Kalamazoo College he was chair of Greek and systematic theology. And so it makes sense that Schuyler was looking to go on, join his sister, and make his fortune in the West. Now, he had already started a career as a daguerreotype photographer in Troy in 1849, so when he came to Kalamazoo, he looked at whatever opportunities presented to himself, and he purchased, not long after he was here, a daguerrean establishment on East Main Street, which was owned by a jeweler named Samuel Selkrieg. And Selkrieg was only a photographer only half the time. The other half, he was a jeweler. And so Baldwin became the first full-time daguerreotypist, or they pronounce it daguerreotypist, which looks really weird, but that's the way they say it, in Kalamazoo. Now, the camera that he's got there is a kind of camera that you would create in making daguerreotypes. And if you've ever seen daguerreotypes, they're very unique images. There's no negatives whatsoever. And the exposure time varied between 3 to 30 minutes. The average time of the exposure was about 20 minutes. So you can imagine how very quiet you had to sit there while they were taking your picture. And what he liked to do in the papers is he'd like to advertise his studio and talk about how much light came into a studio, because that was really important when you were doing something like this. He traveled back and forth to New York, and he even had a wagon gallery that traveled around. Now, he made daguerreotypes, he made ambrotypes, but by 1856, Baldwin is moving into paper photography. And he starts in 1856 and then goes full-time into paper, because obviously with paper you're going to have negatives, around 1859. Now, the first thing he gets into are what are referred to as the carte de visite. These are photographs, these are paper photographs that were popular between 1860 and 1880. Now, they were very small. They were about 2 1/4 inches by 4 1/4 inches, almost the size of a calling card, which is where you get the term carte de visite. And if I mispronounce that, I apologize. Because you could easily give it to somebody and it would be like a calling card. They were very inexpensive to produce too. So here we have some individuals that are identified, some are not. But these are examples of photographs that Baldwin took of individuals. Some of these, like Mrs. Jane Johnson, who's over here on the left-hand side, this was taken around 1866. We have a couple other ones that date from about 1866, and one of the ways that you can tell that, if I flipped these photos over, yes, they would have Schuyler Baldwin's name, but the other thing that they would have on them was revenue stamps, which were used during the Civil War to raise money for the Union Army. So this is an example of the kinds of photos that Baldwin took at this time. Another thing he got into is what I can only liken as commissions, taking photographs of houses for people. You may recognize the one in the left-hand corner. That is the William D. Yo house on South Street, 602 West South. It's a Gothic revival built around 1852, 1853. For William D. Yo, who was a lawyer and a postmaster from the area. And see, this is many, many years before, well, not many years, but the William Wood, William Upjohn home is not there to the right of the home. And so you've got the DOs sitting in front of that house. And then this photo over here is the Arthur Sprague home at 1012 Academy Street. And it makes sense that he would have taken a picture on Academy Street because Baldwin lived on Academy at the time, not far from the downtown area. He segued into something that was exceedingly popular in the last half of the 19th century. He went from paper photographs like carte de visite, portrait photography, and there was a period of, oh, well, no, I should say before I do that, another thing that Baldwin did, there were two paintings that Anthony Cooley had done in the 1850s. One over on the left-hand side was Kalamazoo in 1832, which shows Titus Bronson standing at the fence talking to Jonathan Abbott, who was our first doctor and also postmaster. And then I always feel bad about it because the only picture we ever have of Sally Bronson, Titus's wife, is this woman milking the cow. I feel sorry for Sally there. And she's talking to Reverend Thomas Merrill, who's the Methodist minister. So this one was done by Anthony Cooley in the 1850s. And then he also did this painting here, which was the first court in Kalamazoo in 1832, which coincidentally happened to be in a cabin on the grounds of Titus Bronson's cabin. And if you're not sure where Titus Bronson's cabin was, it was located on the corner of North Park and Water Street, where the Cancer Center is located, near Arcadia Creek, which Titus Bronson was said to have developed the name for that creek. Well, Baldwin took photos of the original paintings, which were in a gallery at that time, and then these were sold to people. They were framed, and it was a way of making money, for one thing, of these paintings. And I would like to say, interject, that both of these paintings are in the collection of the Kalamazoo Valley Museum. Not only these two paintings, but also a painting that was done by Anthony Cooley's son, Benjamin Cooley, of Titus Bronson. So this is another thing that Baldwin was doing. But the other thing that we really know Schuyler Baldwin for are the stereographs. Stereographs, very briefly, stereographs were the rage of the last half of the 19th century, probably from about 1850 to about 1900, more specifically probably from about 1859 until about 1900. Now they look like they're identical images. They are not, because when you look at the kind of equipment that they used, oh wait, do I have it? Oh, there we go. When you look at the kind of equipment that they used to take these photographs, you can see the camera up here in the left-hand side and the camera down here in the lower left-hand side. You'll notice that it has something that a lot of cameras did not have, two lenses. These lenses were approximately 2 inches apart, which is the space between your eyes. Okay? So they would take the photograph and then they would mount it on a piece of cardboard. And this was the viewer that you would use to view the stereograph. And if you're familiar with the concept of the stereograph, you know that you would look at it, and after a while, the picture would appear 3D. Very similar to, this is why I have the ViewMaster in here. I'm running into a situation, though, now with the younger generation when I ask them if they know what a ViewMaster is, and they look at me like, huh? What? What's that? But the ViewMaster is the same concept of what the stereograph was back in the 19th century. Well, the stereograph was the rage because you had photographers that would take pictures like this. I always joke about this photo because this is a photo that in the book that I co-authored with Pam O'Connor, Kalamazoo Lost and Found, we swore that we would not use this photo. Why? Because it appeared, and it has nothing to do about, I don't have anything against elephants. Elephants are nice animals. It was just that this picture seemed to have appeared in every book of Kalamazoo photos up to that point. It appeared in Willis Dunbar's book. It appeared in other books of it. I think Peter Schmidt may have had it in there somehow. But there was always this picture, which Keith Howard thinks is around 1883. And where we're looking at Michigan Avenue. We are looking west from approximately Portage Street. When I look at this view, I'm thinking that Schuyler Baldwin may have been standing approximately maybe on the second floor of the building on the corner of Portage and East Michigan where the Old Peninsula Brew Pub is located. I think he must have been located either, maybe not on the second floor, maybe the third floor, taking this photo here. So this is what people had in their homes. They had volumes of these things. They had, you could buy ones on, any European city that you could think of. You could buy them on all kinds of cities in the United States. You could buy them on flowers. You could buy them a series on paintings by certain artists. And people would have these in their rooms, and maybe one of the things that they would do is they would sit around and they would look at their stereographs. So what Baldwin did was nothing different than any other photographer was doing in the last half of the 19th century, which was to, again, think of another way that you could make income. So you would produce these stereographs, you would then advertise them and sell them, and get out there so that people, so that people could buy them. The service that he did as far as documenting Kalamazoo history is just astronomical. We don't know how many. Now, you'll see that in the next photographs that you're going to see, you're just going to see the single image of the stereograph rather than we're showing you both images. We don't know how many stereographs Baldwin produced. We don't. There's no tally, there's no records, there's no booklet that tells us how many that he's done. And in fact, in some cases, I've seen views in getting ready for this program that I've never seen before. Okay, we're looking, these two, the one in the left-hand corner and the one down here in the center, are the same view. We are looking west down Michigan Avenue. And I really like these two because I don't know which one is first. It's like the chicken or the egg. Because when you compare the two views, I think probably this one might have been first because you see the streetcar coming down the track, almost ready to make the turn onto Portage. You can see these two individuals right here. Although maybe this one is first because they seem to be, maybe these are the same two guys and they're sitting there talking. I don't know. But then you can see the streetcars coming down here. Right here we have the Kalamazoo House, which is where the Haymarket Building is located, right at that intersection of Portage and East Michigan. Up here, we're looking at the opposite view. We're looking east down Michigan Avenue, just beyond Rose Street. So I'm standing almost across from the Kalamazoo Center, and you can see the horse-drawn streetcar coming down the west. Some of the other series that Baldwin did. Okay, we've got this, the one over in the left-hand corner. When I was going through the collection at the archives, I found a copy of this one, and I had never seen this before. You think people think I probably saw every photo ever taken of Kalamazoo. That's not true, that's wrong. But this one, we are looking east down Michigan Avenue, just past Westnedge or West Street. And you can see way off in the distance, that spire on the left-hand side, that's the First Baptist Church. And then the smaller one next to it is St. Luke's Episcopal Church, which used to be on the corner of Michigan Avenue and Park Street, where the parking lot is for First Congregational Church. This house right here is really interesting. This first house that you see here with that sort of rounded cupola. You may not remember it that way, but if you remember the Truesdale Funeral Home that used to be on Michigan Avenue across from the post office, that's that home right there. It was built by William House in the 1860s. So that was a view that I had never seen before. This one is one that even predates that one that I showed you earlier. No, I don't think it predates it, but this is a little bit closer. This, again, we're looking down Michigan Avenue. We're looking down again towards the west. You can see right up here with that building with that little tower at the top. That's the Burdick Hotel, where the Radisson is right now. And then down below, it's just an unidentified street. And I'm looking very hard to see if I can figure out where that street is. Don't really know, don't really have any kind of indication. My guess is it might be a street, not a north-south street, but possibly an east-west street. And I keep looking for clues, and I haven't really identified it yet. This is another one of Baldwin's stereographs that I hadn't seen before I started preparing for this program. This is taken from Prospect Hill. And if you know your hills, Prospect Hill is where East Campus, where East Hall is located. So this is looking down into the Vine neighborhood. Old Central is located like right around in this area here. But I could just look at these photos. I know Beth could look at these photos. I'm sure you could all look at these photos and just figure out where different things are. Is that house still here? Is that street still there? Bronson Park, of course, was a very, very popular source for Mr. Baldwin. We can date these, of course, because of the fountain, which was put in around 1880, 1881, in the same location where the Iannelli fountain is located right now. I sort of like this little group of young people he has over here. You can see the stroller there for their dolls and sitting around there and getting it all set up. And then we've got, we're looking towards, I'm pretty sure, I don't know if we're looking towards I think that's Rose Street possibly, or maybe Main. I'm really not too sure. Of course, some of those trees may still be in Bronson Park. I don't quite know what their condition are, but here we have Bronson Park. He also did schools. The building on the left is the Union School, which opened in 1859 on the site of where Old Central is currently right now in the corner of Vine and Westnedge. That building was there until 1880 when it was taken down because of concerns about its safety. So there's one date right there that we can use. And this building here on the right-hand side, which is one that has been near and dear to my heart, and that is the Michigan Female Seminary, which was over on the east side, across the river, on the corner of Gull and Riverview, approximately where St. Mary's Catholic Parish is. And that was opened between 1867 and 1907. Quite a sizable building, as you can see there. So he did have some schools, too. Churches. Churches were really big that Baldwin photographed and made into stereographs. We've got St. Augustine over in the left-hand corner. Now, this is not in the location of where St. A's is now. This was in its original location on Kalamazoo Avenue at the intersection of Kalamazoo and North Park, sort of across the street from where the Sanawax building is. So we've got the church there. The one down here below in the center, First Baptist Church, when it still had its steeple. And over here on the right-hand corner, First Congregational Church, and this was the church that was built around 1889, 1890 to replace a church that had burned. Interior photography is so unusual because obviously they don't have the kind of lighting that we have these days. But Baldwin did do some interiors, and especially with churches. So the photograph on the left-hand side is an interior of St. A's. And the photograph in the lower right hand here is First Presbyterian Church when it was located on the corner of South Rose and South Street. In fact, right across from the entry of the Kalamazoo Public Library, where you have that office building that was built by Mr. Johnson. First Presbyterian was located there. And some unusual views that I've seen. Okay, you probably recognize that building on the left-hand side. The Ladies Library Association. What's interesting about this view, and it was a stereograph, is the perspective of this. This is normally with the Ladies Library, you see the South Park Street entrance. This one is the north side of the building. So they're standing almost where the Civic is, and they're looking towards the south, that view. And this one, again, here we have another interior. This is actually a house interior, which is pretty cool because you usually don't see too many house interiors. So it goes to show you that maybe sometimes Baldwin would make stereographs and make them specially for certain clients. And this was Mr. Cobb's house, Mr. S.S. Cobb, who lived in the 400 block of West Michigan. Then you have the Kalamazoo State Hospital, or at this time when these photos were taken, the Michigan Asylum for the Insane. Baldwin really spent, there's quite a wide series that he did of the state hospital buildings. We have exteriors, like both in the left-hand side and the right-hand side, we've got the female department. There was the female building, there was the male building, and then in the center, I'm sure you recognize that. That's the Gate Cottage, which still exists. And this, I think, it's just wonderful because the building was built in 1880, and so you've got a carriage coming out. So there was a little bit of a fence around there. Obviously not a fence that encircled the entire hospital. But you can see a vehicle coming out there. Now, those are not the only ones that Baldwin did. We also have a sort of stage setting in the left-hand side where you have individuals that are sitting on the grounds of the Michigan Asylum for the Insane. And this is one here that I found recently, just a carriage driving through the driveway with buildings in the background. The ones that you really don't have too much explanation about that Baldwin took were the interiors that he did of some of the buildings. Of course, obviously, this is before any privacy laws or anything else that was out there, seriously. So what we have on the left-hand side was a hallway from the women's hall, or the women's building. And then on the right-hand side, we have a hallway from the men's hall. We don't know, because there's no explanation. Was he photographing patients? Was he photographing staff? You know, what did he really have here? And especially the one on the left, I find, as I said, very haunting, because if those were patients, and obviously this was a time period when people weren't so concerned about privacy and anything like that. When last year we did a walk at the Kalamazoo State Hospital, you may have been with me when we did that. And I'm very, very sensitive about it because they stress, make sure that people aren't taking any photographs. If they want to take the photograph of a water tower, that's it, but not to take any photographs around because they still have people who are there. So I'm very sensitive to it. He also had photos of other rooms and even some of the rooms down more towards the basement area, maybe storage rooms, the kitchen, things that you wouldn't think about. But it was probably a long series of stereographs that Baldwin took of that institution. Now, Kalamazoo is not exactly the only city that Baldwin did this. As I said, he was a very mobile person. He didn't have a studio in Kalamazoo too long. He had actually had other people running the studio. And he had a movable studio. He had a wagon where he carried his equipment from place to place. And he traveled and sold stereographic views in Grand Rapids. And this is a book that came out a few years ago. It was published by, I think this was Arcadia Press that publishes a series of these books. And it was called Grand Rapids and Stereographs. They don't definitively say that this is Baldwin, but let's be honest. This guy was the biggest photographer of stereographs in Grand Rapids. Who else would be sitting there in a promotional photo with stereographs on his lap? It would almost have to be Schuyler Baldwin. And I've sat there and compared that photo with that first photo I showed you to see if there's any similarities. If it isn't, I'm sure wishing it is. The two photographs that I have put in here are two stereographs that he did, coincidentally, of the Graves house. Why was he so familiar with Grand Rapids? Because it's been said that he started there in 1874 and continued for probably the next 20 years going up to Grand Rapids and taking views. Well, that was because his sister and brother-in-law, who had been in Kalamazoo and then moved to other places, eventually found their way back to Grand Rapids. And so the house you see on the left-hand side is Schuyler Baldwin's sister and his brother-in-law, who was the pastor of the Fountain Street Baptist Church in Grand Rapids, and then his two nephews. Baldwin never married. And then on the right-hand side is the interior of the Graves house. Wasn't just Grand Rapids. He also sold stereo views from Marshall, from Battle Creek, from Colorado, and even Niagara Falls. Baldwin passed away in 1900. He had moved to Grand Rapids to be closer to his family. His nephew was a doctor, and his nephew treated him when he was ill. And he died in Grand Rapids and is buried in Grand Rapids. And it was said that he was one of the best-known landscape photographers in Michigan. Well, we segue from Schuyler Baldwin to Wallace White. And there's a lot of similarities between White and Baldwin. Wallace White was born in Otsego Township in 1842. He worked on his father's farm, but wanted to be a photographer. He was a photographer in Otsego around 1867. 2 years earlier, he married Julia, who was sitting behind him, and they had no children. But he decided to come to Kalamazoo, and so he came here in 1869. He originally dealt in photographic equipment on a store on Main Street. But then in 1871, started working as the operator of a gallery called the Perry's Gallery, P.H. Perry, P-E-R-R-Y. And Perry had actually worked for Baldwin and had taken over the studio. So ironically, White comes to Kalamazoo and he begins working at Perry's studio, which had actually been Baldwin's studio. And then in 1873, he purchased it. Now, as opposed to Baldwin, White really got into portrait photography. Obviously, that is going to be his real true bread and butter for a long time. So here we have some of the carte de visite that he took throughout the years. And the thing with photography in the 19th century, and even into the 20th century, it's wonderful in trying to date photographs, because obviously you can date photographs with the kind of photograph that it is. I had mentioned that the carte de visite is from about 1860 to about 1880. You can also date it through the clothing, but you can also date it because of the photographer who always would stamp, who would have on the cardboard their name, their address, and it's the address that's important because you can go through the city directories and that can give you at least a framework of when they were operating at that time. Okay, another thing that he got into was the next type of photograph, which were the cabinet cards. The cabinet cards were from 1870 to about 1890. Those were a little bigger. They were about 4 by 6. They were mounted on thick board. In fact, the board that they were mounted on was a little bit thicker than the carte de visite. And they were, sometimes their, what was around them, their border was very simple, and then eventually it evolved into gold trim and scalloped edges. But as with the carte de visite, there was always a photographer's name somewhere, hopefully, which helps you. Here's an example of some of the backs that White had on his photographs through the years. Of course, you'll see the repetition of the word artist. Artistic photographer, artist. I love this one with the handwriting. Artist, Kalamazoo, Michigan. And if you've got that street, if you've got that address, that really helps you. And you can see with White, he bounced around from location to location. So that helps a lot when you're dating these photographs as far as location goes. But just like Baldwin, White also got into stereographs. He was producing stereographs at the same time that Baldwin was producing them. And it's really easy to tell the difference between the two of them because being good business people, they're going to write their names on the back of them or the front of them. So on that cardboard on the left-hand side, you'll see either Baldwin's name or you'll see Wallace, or you'll see White's name or W.S. White, which is what he was known for. Or sometimes you'll see that information on the back. Sometimes with Baldwin, you'll see a card that was originally printed for Grand Rapids and then he put Kalamazoo over the back of it. He was a good user of cardboard. But you can see that the views are very, very similar. So here we already saw Baldwin's view of the Union School. Here is White's view of the Union School over in the left-hand corner. Over in the right-hand corner, we have another view of the fountain in Bronson Park, taken at around the same time period. Churches were another thing for White. This is the interior of the First Methodist Church, which at that time was located on the corner of Lovell and Rose Street, where the telephone company is. So we've got a lot of the same sort of things, a lot of the same sort of subjects. Now, White did this one, which is interesting. This is the Parsons Business School. And in 1876, there was an article in the paper that talked about that the Parsons Business School was sending over to Philadelphia for the Centennial Exposition a very large book that was going to be filled with examples of penmanship and work that the students at Parsons Business School had done. And this school was relatively young at this time because it got started in 1869. Parsons, of course, was eventually purchased by Davenport a number of years ago. At this time, when these stereographs were taken, that was located, coincidentally, in that same building where the Old Peninsula Brew Pub is located, on the corner of Portage and East Michigan. None of these are dated. We know that they were taken by White, but it almost seems to be that this one might be a little bit older than that one, but it may not be. Who knows? So he had the contract to do some photography for Parsons Business School. Here we have again, White had his own series of photographs that were from the Kalamazoo State Hospital, although I have yet to see any that White did of the interiors of the buildings. Although I can't say this because I haven't been through all the negatives, and I'll have to tell you where the negatives for W.S. White landed, because it's pretty cool that they're still around here. We don't have the negatives of Schuyler Baldwin, but we do have the negatives around by Wallace White. So again, we have the female building there on the right-hand side, and then we have a group shot. Don't you love the dog with the paws just sort of nicely sitting there crossed like that? I'm sure that Mr. White had that also put together too. I don't have an exterior of it, but one of the things that White also photographed was the Academy of Music, which was built around 1881, 1882, and it was a very lavish building. It was built where the Co-America Bank building is on South Rose Street, and it was designed by the Chicago architectural firm of Dankmar Adler and Louis Sullivan, and it was really something. And you can tell here when you look at the exteriors, the cherry wood, the chandelier, the seats, the staging. I mean, it was something that Kalamazoo had not seen before, and White was there photographing it. And remember, both Baldwin's case and White's case, they're advertising where you can buy these things. More than likely now in White's case, White is actually maintaining a studio on Main Street. So you could buy these views there, you could buy them at any bookstores, you name it, you could buy them anywhere. Another series of unique images that you can find with Wallace White that you don't usually find with Schuyler Baldwin is the Kalamazoo River. There are a number of them. Now exactly what location we're talking about here, I can't tell you because again it doesn't really tell you where they are taken. But a lot of interesting views of the Kalamazoo River and some of the recreation that is happening around it. And this one, there's no explanation. He may have done it for a private client. A picnic done as a stereograph, which of course tells you a lot about, clothing and being outside and what they were having and all that kind of stuff. So Wallace White. Now White also wasn't just in Kalamazoo. White traveled all over. In fact, White advertised that he had a number of stereographs of northern Michigan, Kalamazoo, and Rome. I love that. What a combination. He said specifically of northern Michigan, Mackinac Island, and that's what we're looking at here. There were a number of views that he had looking at the fort, as we can see right here, where he's down below looking up. And think about having to bring that camera and everything else that you need to make those. And then we have some views where he is at the top at Fort Mackinac looking down onto the village. He also said that he had stereographs for sale of Detroit, Gull Lake, Portage, and Schoolcraft. Just a few communities that he had. Now White, he was only involved with photography for about 28 years, which is pretty good, but his main real interest was really music. This is a photo from the Kalamazoo Public Library, as you can tell by that wonderful stamp in the right-hand corner. This is White's military band. White is not in the photo. They're thinking that, of course, he took the photo. He was involved, after he got out of photography, he was involved in bands, in selling instruments, in publishing music. He later was involved with business. He was associated with the Kalamazoo Loose Leaf Binder Company. Now, White passed away in 1921, and when you read the annual reports for the Kalamazoo Public Library, it's pretty cool because you find out in the annual report of 1927 to 1928, it was stated that Miss Elizabeth Barnard, who was in charge of the art department, had secured from Mrs. W.S. White shortly before her death a large collection of Wallace White's negatives, which are at the local history room, if I'm not mistaken, Beth, right? Right, so that's what I was saying, the White negatives. Now, again, are they all of Wallace White's negatives? Who knows? But a great majority of them are there. Okay, George Austen. George Austen, now this is the only photo that I've been able to pull from a newspaper clipping that was scanned by the staff at the Kalamazoo Library. And George Austen was from Watervliet in Berrien County, born in 1864, and he, like Wallace White's father, was a farmer. And so, like Wallace White, George Austen spent his early years working on the farm. He started working as a photographer when he was about 28 in 1892. He had already been married to his wife Mary. They got married in 1886. And their one daughter, Mamie, was born in 1887. He advertised in 1900 in a national publication that he wanted a situation for, in quotes, a good all-around man as a general assistant in some good gallery. Am sober and industrious, 10 years experience, will be at liberty after September 15th. Well, he succeeded in finding a position, and that position was in Kalamazoo. He came to Kalamazoo in 1900 and operated what was called the Beebe Gallery. Harry Beebe was another portrait photographer. It was on the 3rd floor at 134 South Burdick Street, and within 2 years, he became the owner of that gallery, and it was known as the Austin Studio. And at this time in the area, there are like 6 to 8 different photographers in Kalamazoo, so you can imagine that the competition was stiff. Now, Austen is sometimes described as a commercial photographer. Also, I think he was a portrait photographer too. We do have some portraits that were done by George Austen. These are, so we've segued, we've gone from carte de visite to cabinet cards, and now these are referred to as simply, these are just mounted prints that were popular between 1880 and 1900. And you still see, like on 2 of the 3, you can see Austen's name down here. The thing is that there's no address on there, but at least you're going to have the name of the photographer. And you can see that there's different, for example, here we have an oval that's cut. This is Mabel Staley, I think it's Staley. And they don't know if that's either Mabel or Ruth, but I sort of like that little setup. I can't imagine how warm this kid was with gloves on and a fur coat, a fur hat, holding a toy. But here we have a police officer here, unfortunately, or some sort of officer. Unfortunately, he is not identified at all. But this is what was popular towards the end of the 19th century, this kind of print. Another thing we see with Austen, a lot of group prints. This is the Kalamazoo High School senior class. Exactly when, I can't tell you. There's no date on it. This is approximately from 1898 to 1915. This is what I've dated it from, which is a pretty big chunk of years. But they're standing in front, standing and sitting in front of the 3rd Kalamazoo High School, which is not there. The school that's on that site is the 4th high school on that site. He also did houses, and this was really interesting because he did the, I have a portrait here, a mounted photograph of Joseph Clement of Kalamazoo, done by Austen. And this is the house that Clement built on Allen Boulevard. It's still there. It's behind St. A's. Where St. Augustine is was a location of a very large house, part of Mansion Row, that was O.M. Allen Sr.'s house. And Clement was married to O.M. Allen's daughter. And he and O.M. Allen's son and O.M. Allen Sr. were involved in developing Allen Boulevard. And so this was his house here, and these were done by George Austen. So this is an example of the kind of work that George Austen would do. But then we have George's daughter, Mamie, and as Beth knows, this is something that many of us have been interested in for a long time, and that is George's daughter. Okay, now this is an older photograph of Mamie. This is taken probably in the mid-40s when Mamie was working for the Kalamazoo Public Library, and she was known as the movie lady, among many other things, because she showed movies. But there was one time I was processing a collection at the archives, and it was for a family in Watervliet, and there were 2 photos in there that made me jump. And I jump a lot at the archives because I find things and it's just so exciting. This was the first photo. And I looked at it, looked at who did it, and if you can see it a little bit, you might be able to see down here, you've got the name Austen and the address, 134 South Burdick. And I was able to put two and two together when you look at the photos and realize that this is Mamie. This is Mamie when she was much younger. Mamie was born in Watervliet in 1887, and she came with her parents when she was 13 years old. This is the second photo that was in that group. That's Mamie. Now, I don't really know too much about when she got here with her parents, what she did as far as school goes. Tried to check and see if she had gone to high school and graduated from Kalamazoo Central, but have not been able to find that yet. And there is a booklet on the history of the school system where they list all the graduates up through like 1909, and I wasn't able to find Mamie. So either she went to another school or maybe she had gone through 8th grade and that was sufficient. Who knows? If you go through the Kalamazoo Gazette, you do find various mentions of Mamie's name in the social comments of the Gazette about helping at various functions, birthday parties, giving showers for friends, and one article sort of caught my eye, and that kind of stuff. It was, I guess, sort of bittersweet. Someone threw a wedding shower for her. Actually, it was a linen shower in 1909 because she was to get married to a young man. But you can tell, as you read some of the other social notes, that the wedding never happened. But the thing that happened in 1912 is Mamie went to go work with her father. When you read the city directories, it's interesting the different titles that she's given through the years. You can see assistant, you can see clerk, you can see artist, and later manager. And when her father suddenly dies in 1923, Mamie takes over the studio of her father. When she started working for him, she was 25 years old. After his death, when she took over the operation, she had two employees that she worked with, Cornelius Reinbrand and May Dewey. Now, she was not the only woman photographer in Kalamazoo at this time. In fact, in 1925, the Kalamazoo Gazette said that Mrs. Frances Chantelaine was working as a photographer, but she had taken over the studio at the death of her husband. Kalamazoo Gazette said that there are two women photographers in Kalamazoo in charge of high-class studios, which I thought was pretty nice. The city directories note that in 1931 she's still involved with, Mamie is still involved with the studio, her tagline was, "We catch your baby smiling." I thought that was sort of cute. By 1934 she's at home. Now the problem is that because we're in the midst of the Depression, they didn't produce city directories every year. So we don't know exactly when the studio closed because there was no city directory in 32 or 33. But we do know that by 34 she's home. And the thing that happens in 1936, she's beginning to work somewhere else. And where is that? Well, let's step back just a second and look at Kalamazoo Public Library and the New Deal. The Kalamazoo Public Library took great advantage of the federal aid that was available through the New Deal. So in the annual reports, it's interesting, in 1933, the year that Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated, you had one of the New Deal programs, the CWA, or the Civilian Works Administration, and you can see right there that the library was able to acquire money, because in any of these programs, these work programs that were created with the New Deal, what would happen would be the federal government would pay for the salary, but then you would give them various jobs. You would have to pay for the materials. And in the library's situation, though, in 1933-34, they noted in their annual report that they had 10 staff members that were getting paid through the CWA. And you can see how many hours they were working. And in the annual reports, the library liked to talk about how many full-time positions that filled. Now, what kinds of things were these people doing? Well, they were doing clerical work. They were mending books. They were dusting shelves. They were copying catalog cards. That's another thing you got to explain to people who don't remember what it's like in a library. And in 1933-34, the cost to the government was $851.55. In 1935, another program, it was called the Federal Emergency Relief Agency. January of 1934, the library held book talks and reviews. They held about 84 programs over 4 months. Doesn't that make you feel tired, Beth? 84 programs in 4 months? Wow. In 1935, when the Works Progress Administration came in, it was primarily a works program, as you're familiar with, the WPA. There was another similar program that was part of the WPA called the National Youth Administration, which dealt with younger people, college age and high school age. And for the library in 1935-36, you can see that that was 25 new staff members that were working for not only the library, but the museum, which was under the auspices of the library at that time, and how many hours that meant. Well, obviously that impacted Mamie Austin, because in 1935, Mamie Austin was hired by the library under the WPA Women's Project. It's interesting that when you look at the WPA, they employed, between 1935 and 1943, nationwide, more than 8.5 million people. Now, it's interesting, the average salary was about $41 a month, and only about 13.5% of women were employed, but they got paid the same as men, but they did different tasks as men did. Now, it's interesting, there was not 13.5% of the people who were employed through the WPA at the library were women. I'd have to say that almost all of them were. The WPA, as I said, supplied the wages. KPL, how did they use the WPA workers? As I said, copy catalog cards, staff school libraries, men books. The museum used them extensively for doing such things as doing museum records, creating the loan collection, if you remember the loan collection in the Kalamazoo Public Library. Same thing happened at the Grand Rapids Public Library. The loan collection was created because of the WPA. And so Mamie was hired in that case. She was hired specifically, or I should say that the National Youth Administration, you're looking at students from Western State Teachers College and the Kalamazoo Central High School. Mamie was put in the art department. Now, the art department at that point was in a separate building from the library. The library was located right where we are right now, on the corner of South and Rose Street, in the building that is pictured in, I don't know if it's still in here on this floor or not, Beth, the picture of the library. The painting that there used to be, probably not. It may be out there, anyway. But then next to it on Rose Street was the Peck home where the museum was located. And next to that, on the corner of Rose and Lovell, was the Coffer home. It was an Italianate home, and that was where the art department was located. And the art department, see, I got you looking, Beth. The art department had a lot of different things that you could check out. There were lantern slides. Lantern slides, we actually had the library's last lantern slides at the museum when I was there. They're glass slides, and you would put them in this projector, and it would project. It's like very, very, very early slides or film strips or things like that. And so they had that. They had pictures that were mounted on construction paper that you could check out. They had all kinds of different things. So what did Mamie do? Well, she did lantern slides, she colored costume plates, she copied old photographs, and she added to the picture file. 1936, though, it's noted in the annual report that Mamie is doing what? Mamie is out there taking photographs. It says specifically in the annual report, she's taking photographs of local industries. These were going to be mounted onto construction paper and used by students throughout the area. This is an absolute gold mine, Mamie Austin's photographs, as far as capturing life in Kalamazoo in the 1930s and the early 1940s. We don't know how many photos Mamie actually took. Now, this was not the WPA program that employed the artists, where a lot of times the negatives or the historical reporting or the records would go to Washington or regional centers or whatever. She would produce these negatives. They would be printed onto these, like I said, pieces of construction paper, and then they would be put in the picture file, and people could check them out for the classes. The first batch of photos that she did between 1936 and 1939, I've been able to put together a list that they have at the library. They have about 120 photos in that section. And it's interesting, of the 120, 90 of them, or 75% of the ones that remain, are from industry. So here we have Shakespeare fishing reels. This is another photograph of Shakespeare. I love when I look at this because obviously OSHA is not in place when you see these workers right here and all these little things that could get into eyes and everything else like that. This is Shakespeare. There's a series of photos of Gibson. Now, I could not put everything in here. If I did, we would be here past 8:30, Beth. We'd be here past 9:30. Anyway, I can show you where you can find Mamie's photos if you would like to see them on your computer. Obviously, you can see them if you go down to the local history room, but you can also see them through the catalog. So we have Gibson. This is the Grace Corset Company, and you can see you've got that stamp over in the corner that says Kalamazoo Public Library, because they did stamp them all. I love the Kalamazoo Stove Company. I love this because, okay, I've got my point and shoot digital camera. I don't have like some of these people have with the big lenses and everything else like that. But when I see something like this, this is a woman who really knew what she was doing. I mean, she learned on her father's knee. This one with the Kalamazoo Stove Company just utterly amazes me how she's been able to pick up the light of the molten metal as it's pouring into the mold. This is one where they're doing polishing of the Kalamazoo stoves. Absolutely remarkable. I've been an admirer of Mamie Austin for many, many years. And like I said, I don't think she ever knew that someone, 50, 60 years after she passed on, are gushing over her photographs like this. And if I gush too much, I apologize. Kalamazoo Sled Company. Now, these are not the only ones. There are many, many more. Like I said, there are 90 photographs from this first series. Now, she just didn't do industry in this first section here. This is incredible because this is an image that you will not find. Now, maybe there's more images of this somewhere. I haven't found it. What is this? This is the city market. This is the farmer's market, but this is before it goes to Bank Street. This is the farmer's market between 1936, the date's around, it's like 1930s, but it was on Mill Street. This is before it went to Bank Street. I have never seen an image like this that shows the farmer's market at that location. This is the Infant Welfare Station. What's the Infant Welfare Station? The Infant Welfare Station was a very small building that was located at the intersection of Gull and North Streets. If you go to the food co-op, if you go down to Mackenzie's, just on the other side, there's a little triangular piece of property. That's where this was located. It began in 1916 through the Child Welfare League. If you had a child that was 2 years or under, you could bring them to the Infant Welfare Station and they could be examined by physicians, by public health care nurses. They had a series of classes for parents. They even had sessions for expectant fathers. And so this is a small detail of the Infant Welfare Station. It does not. The building is gone. It was around 1937, when you look at the annual reports, that one of the things that Mamie began to also do, in addition to all the other things that she did, is she began to take movies into the schools. Now, these were movies that were rented by the schools. I should also say that it was around 1937-38 that they had this program in the library that was called an apprentice class, where they took a certain number of people, women mostly, and trained them about the library, and then they would usually get full-time jobs in various places. And she also that year photographed 1,300 items at the Kalamazoo Public Museum, so quite busy. Between 1938 and 1939, that fiscal year, she made over 350 visits to elementary schools to show films, and also she showed films to the general public. Well, in September of 1941, the WPA program was winding down. It technically was discontinued in March of 1942, but the library did not want to lose her services, so she actually became a full-time staff member of the Kalamazoo Public Library and became an art department assistant. Well, it was around that time in 1941 that she again started another series of photographs of Kalamazoo. In fact, it was announced in the annual reports. Now, the earlier section in the 1936, 1937, 38, around in that period, there's about 120 photos listed. But again, let me stress, these are not the only photos I'm sure that Mamie took. In the 1940s, there are 77 that are surviving, and you can see a difference in her emphasis. She's not doing so much industry, she's doing more schools and education. About 44% of the photos she takes in this section come from our schools. So you can see in the annual reports it's stated what she's doing, that she's looking at public buildings and parks, talks about how she's adding more photographs to the local collection, and this was all supposed to be for school use. So we've got the new Iannelli fountain. This one was taken in 1941. This is the Alfonso Iannelli fountain in Bronson Park. Another thing that we've got here, she's done a number of parks. This is Lacrone Park over on the north side. This one was taken in around 1941. There's also a nice series she did of Crane Park. And here's Millam Park in 1941. We've got an entrance there over on the left-hand side, and over here in the lower right-hand side, you've got the pool and the bathhouse at Millam Park. So we've done parks, but another thing that she did a lot of are schools. So Jen Clark, and I know this building in the left-hand corner very well, because the one in the left-hand corner is Parkwood School. She also did one of Upjohn next door. And then this one in the lower right-hand corner, you may remember, this is the Wilson School that was over on the east side. That's another one that she photographed. That one was designed by Ernest Batterson, who was a local architect. Over here in the left-hand corner, excuse me, we have Hillcrest on Cherry, which is part of Kazoo. And then the right-hand corner here, we have Edison, which has a lot of the older school that was built in the 19th century, but you can see this 1920s school over here in the back, and that is still in existence. Mamie continued to show films in schools. She spends more than half her time in the schools. In 1949, the art department is changing. It moves to the main library, and Mamie ends her movie career not long after this photo was taken, because if it says 75 years of service, and the library started technically in 1872 as a public library, then this picture was taken in 1947. So within 2 years of when this photo was taken, she's no longer going to the schools to do films, because that's something that the schools are taking over themselves. So her major emphasis at that time is she's taking care of the audiovisual collection that they have in the library, the equipment, and she's still showing films for adults and children at the library. Unfortunately, Mamie passes away in October of 1949 at the age of 62. It was very sudden. She was still working at the library at the time. And eventually what happens is the art department becomes the audiovisual department, which you might remember. Many, many years ago, I remember it quite well. It was over on the first floor, down over in the corner, where for years they still rented out equipment, where you could check out equipment, you could check out a screen, you could check out, the picture file was still there. I'm talking like 30, 35 years ago. And when they dismantled the audiovisual department, fortunately, a lot of Mamie's photos were taken over from the AV department over to the local history room, and that's where some of those are located. The last photographer I'd like to focus on this evening is one that is, we see a lot, near and dear to my heart, because we have the bulk, now I wouldn't say the bulk of his collection, we have a great majority of his collection at the archives, and that's Ward Morgan. These are two photos that were taken of Ward Morgan and his wife Helen, one on the left when they were first married in 1938, and then the right-hand corner when they celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1988. Ward and Helen owned and operated a photographic studio for over 50 years, and it was primarily commercial here in Kalamazoo. They took a wide variety of photographs for a wide variety of companies, and the thing I found out after talking to, or through email, Ward's son, Ken Morgan, is that how Ward would use various family members as models. And so in this one, which was done for Sutherland Paper Company, and I'm still trying to figure out where the paper company is. I don't know if it's because of the tablecloth or what it is, but that's Ward's wife, Helen, on the right-hand side, and the gentleman on the left-hand side is Ward's brother. The depth and breadth of this collection is incredible. I first was introduced to it many years ago when we were collecting images for Kalamazoo Lost and Found, and it still amazes me with what's there. It starts a little bit in the 30s, mainly in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and I think that's about the strength of the collection. This is the Kalamazoo Stove Company. This was taken during World War II, and they're making parachute flares for the war effort. This is the J.R. Jones Clothing Company, and they are having a shirt sale in the 1940s. There's a whole series of gas stations. He had a lot of clients that he would take photos for, and this is the station where Bell's Beer is located, so we are on Kalamazoo Avenue. If we went straight down, we'd hit the Santa Wax building, or we wouldn't be that far away from the intersection of Burdick Street. So there's a number of gas stations. We have approximately 25,000 negatives of the Morgan collection. I know there's many more out there that he did not keep the negatives, but gave the negatives to the clients. This is another gas station. Now this is interesting because this was located not far from where we are. This was on the corner of South Rose and Lovell Street. In fact, where the police station was built and is no more. So this is Lovell right here, and this is Rose Street right here. So just kitty corner from the Kalamazoo Public Library. You'll be amazed at what you can find in the Ward Morgan collection. This is Michigan Avenue. This is probably in the if the American National Bank is up there, we know it's 1930, so it's in the 1930s. This is the Western Michigan University Student Center. This is the snack bar. This was taken in 1958. Can't you taste those shakes? I'm sure they were great. He also took pictures for various clients. This was done for a landscape company. It's a home on Embry off Oakland Drive, and showing the typical suburban or the backyard, the post-World War II backyard. I love the dog. The dog is great. The dog's just looking there saying, "Okay, my turn, my turn." He wants the food. This is Eddie of Eddie's Lane, the gentleman who drove the bus around the Western State Teachers College, Western Michigan College for many years. And they named that little street just off West Michigan in his honor, and Eddie's Lane is still there. Now this is one that Tam will remember, because Tam asked me for a copy of this. You may be seeing this in the Gazette in the future, because this was in 1975, so he was taking pictures even in the 70s and into the 80s. This is when Ron Woods and Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones was visiting Gibson for a visit. And it's interesting because the client was a company in Illinois, so it wasn't done for Gibson. It was done for this client in Illinois, and there's about 10 photos that's in the collection. This is my all-time favorite. Oh, I love this one. If you've gotten the Portage printing calendar for 2015, I had to put this down for November. It's perfect. This was done for the Bryant Paper Mill or Bryant Paper Company. I don't know if it was done for a newsletter. I don't know what it was done for. We have very little information, and he was very good about writing everything down, like the date and the source and who it was for and whatever. And I just love it. It was one thing to see it as a negative, but then when they scanned it and printed out, and you see the guy holding the turkey and the turkey's look, and the nurse with her eyes closed holding the axe. Classic, absolutely classic. So now we're back to the woman in white. The question that, of course, we local historians, always have to wonder is, how do we document life today? Are we going to have the woman in white like this? We know that there are photographers out there that are documenting things. John Lacko, for many years, for several times, did the documentary photography project where they documented life in Kalamazoo at different time periods, and we hope that that will continue. I don't know how many institutions have actually received anything on digital format yet, and of course the challenge of receiving digital photographs on discs, of course, is the technology and making sure that you have the technology to be able to play this and record this, because we'd like to know what the future woman in white looks like. Now, who that might be, I really don't know. I wanted to show you that, there are some stereographs that we know Baldwin, we know White, but I threw these in to show you that sometimes those cards have no names whatsoever. And so I don't know who these belong to yet, but this is one of my mysteries. You've got the Union School over in the left-hand corner. This is the Charles Bates House, which stood where the Stowe tennis courts are located on the campus of Kalamazoo College. That was built around 1870. We've got the First Presbyterian Church. Now, this was not the interior of the building I showed you earlier. This was the early building that was built around 1849 on that same location on South and Rose Street. And I really like this one because what you can see in the distance is the tower of the building called Fireman's Hall, which was built around 1852, 1853, which faced Burdick Street. But this one is really cool. This one is really cool. This was a stereograph. There's no name attached to it. But if you turn around the back of it, it says the fairgrounds in the Vine neighborhood. Well, the county it can't be. The fairgrounds in the Vine neighborhood were only there until about 1858. Then eventually it moved to the National Driving Park, which was on the corner of Portage and Washington in the Edison neighborhood. My guess is more than likely that's got to be it, because when you think of the technology of the stereographs, and especially if I can examine more the clothing of the women, that's not going to be 1850 clothing. That's going to be more in the 19th century. So we still have a lot of stereographs out there that we either A, haven't seen, or B, can't identify, and that's what is so cool about this. So this evening, I appreciate your willingness to listen to me talk about 5 photographers. There are so many out there, and like I said, I'm sure that they never knew that people were going to be talking about their photographs 100 and so years later, but aren't we very lucky that we are? All right. Thank you very much.